Welcome to OLC 4.0. It is term 2B, and this is class 23. We're looking at assignment 33 and also looking at contractions. Today is May 26, 2025, and this is Jillian Percy. Here are all the ways to contact us. You can call me at the studio, 1-800-465-7144. You can call the office, 1-800-667-3703. My extension is 2211. There is someone at reception until 4:30. My email is jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. My other email is jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. That's the one that students often use if they're sharing Google Documents with me. My Facebook is gpercywasa. And with that one, if you're sending me a friend request, please send me like a little message so I know what your full name is and what course you're in, because I've got like 5 different courses. So that way I know what we're talking about when I get online. There are 2 different YouTube channels that you can watch to see classes. One is the school channel, which is called WASA Distance Education YouTube channel. That has all the teachers' classes from just this year. Now, this particular course I also did earlier this year in September, October, and that version is up. There's no significant difference between the September version and this version. Maybe like a slide or 2 is different, but basically it's all the same information. If you're looking for this exact one, then you would go to my teacher YouTube channel, which is also G Percy Wasa, and there will be a term 2B OLC 40 playlist. Okay. So how to hand in assignments is my most popular question. There are so many different ways you can hand in assignments. We try to make it really easy, and so there's something for everybody. If you have a learning center in your community, then you give it to the DEC that works there, have them scan it, and then email it along to me. You can fax it to me, 1-800-463-7852. That's in Ontario. Or if you're anywhere else outside of Ontario, 1-877-990-2023. You can also email it to me with the assignment as an attachment yourself, like if you've been doing it on Word document or something. When you do that, send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. That's kind of our email source for all the assignments. The secretary goes through that. They log what work got submitted. They print it off. They send it to the right teacher. That way it's also accessible if the teacher changed suddenly. Please include your full name, the course name, the assignment name and number on the actual physical assignment, not just in the email. Okay, because I never see the email, I just see the physical assignment. If an assignment asks you for a rough or a good draft, label it right on so I know which one is which when I'm marking. Sometimes people are sure it's obvious, but it's not always obvious to me, okay? Some people share documents with me through Google Docs. When you do that, make sure to include me as somebody who's allowed to view or edit. I won't actually edit your documents, but you have to give me a way to access it. If you just share the link, it won't let me in. You can mail it to me, but I really do not encourage that. When you do that, make sure you hang on to the originals and just mail me your copies. You can also take a photograph of your assignment, especially if you're doing like it handwritten. A lot of people will do that. And then they will send me the photograph either through Facebook or they will send it to me as an attachment in the email. Don't just cut and paste it right into the email because it comes up at a very odd size and I have to kind of play with it a little bit. The best way, if you don't already have a DEC, you can scan it, is download a scanner app on your phone and then scan it. It's just like taking a photograph basically, but it just works out a lot better. It gives me a much more clear image. I use Adobe Scan, it's free, it's a reliable company. Install it, you open it up, and you just kind of hold it over your assignment like you're going to take a picture of it. There's these little blue dots in the corners that will kind of line up with the corners of your document. You can play with the edges to see if it's what you want. And then you just kind of keep on doing that until all the pages are done. Hit continue. Then it will let you preview everything before you go any further. If you need to retake something, you can. If you need to put the pages in a different order, you can. Then you save the PDF, give it a name, and save it to whatever you save. Google Drive, Dropbox, or whatever. Then write me an email and attach it. That's kind of the a really good way to do it. So we are currently in week 7 of this 9-week course. I can't believe it. We only have 2 weeks left of school. The last day we accept assignments is generally June 12th. June 13th is reserved for handing in an exam, okay? This course has a pretty long culminating activity. It doesn't have an exam, and it will take, I estimate, between 5 to 10 hours, okay? I'm being really broad because I don't know how quickly you write. Some people will do like 5 different versions, and some people will do one, okay? Do not attempt to leave this until the last day. It will be really difficult to complete, especially if you work full-time or you are taking care of children all day, okay? If you plan to finish this course before the summertime, especially if you're a potential grad, ask me for the culminating activity right away so that you have plenty of time to work on it. It is worth 20% of your grade. It can easily boost your mark from a D to a B. So it is worth doing and worth doing well. If you are one of our potential grads for this June, I strongly recommend completing all the assignments by May 30th, which is this Friday, right? It takes quite a bit of time for me to do all the marking and write up the report cards. I have 134 students in this course alone. I've got over 200 in all the courses I teach. So I cannot complete all the marking in one day if everybody leaves it to the end, okay? Whatever you've got done, try once a week to hand me in stuff. If you do your work during the week, hand it to me on Friday. If you tend to do your work on the weekend, hand it in to me on Monday. Just so I've got a little bit to mark all along. Don't hang on to it until like you finished entire unit. It takes me a lot longer to mark it that way. Now, if you're running so far behind that you're like, I don't think I'm gonna get finished in the next couple of weeks. Do you guys do summer school? Well, as a matter of fact, we do summer school. In this particular class, we are running this summer and I will be doing the marking. So there aren't any live classes in the summer term, but you can still watch the recorded classes and I will still be available by email and you can still hand things in. So that is still a possibility. Just call the office or give me a little message so that I know and we can enroll you in the summer term. If you're wanting to do that, you can go to our Facebook page called WASA Distance Education Center. There's a little post about it and it's got a little link where you click on the link and it gives you to the page and you can fill that out and send it in. Or if you're having trouble with that, you can also just give the office a phone call and have them enroll you in the summer term, okay? So here are our learning goals for today. By the end of today's class and assignments, I will write complete and correct sentences that show a good understanding and usage of contractions. Oh, I modified this a little bit. We're not worrying about, oh yeah. No, we're not. Sorry, I had to modify something a little bit. There we go. We are going to identify the topic, the audience, the purpose for writing, and the requirements of a particular writing form. Use appropriate strategies to monitor your comprehension when reading informational narrative texts. Demonstrate the ability to read independently for personal, school-related, and career-related purposes. Use appropriate strategies to discover the meaning of unfamiliar and technical words encountered in your reading. Okay, so writing complete and correct sentences that show accurate usage and understanding of contractions. Super important topic. Okay, so last week we were talking a little bit about apostrophes and how we can use them with an S to show that belonging or possession with nouns. Now, we also use apostrophes to show that a letter is missing when we are making a contraction. A contraction is when we push 2 words together to create one word. And we drop usually one of the sounds as we do this, and we put a little apostrophe in the place of the missing letter. So I have would become I've, I apostrophe V. We use a lot of contractions in English. And I'm going to go over some of the most common contractions. I don't think I'm covering all of them, but these are the most common ones. I find that if you don't use contractions in your writing or speech, it can often make your words sound a little bit stiff or a little bit formal. So, some common ones in the present tense. Present tense is happening right now. I plus am equals I'm, like I'm going to the store. It plus is equal it's. It's windy today. He plus is, he's my brother. She plus is, she's swimming tonight. Who plus is, who's hungry. I plus have is I've been running. You plus have, you've been sick. You plus are, you're on the team. We plus are, we're done our work. Now, I want to point out, it looks almost exactly the same as the word were, W-E-R-E, except for the contraction, but we pronounce them completely differently, right? We say the we, because that's the word, we, we just can't drop that R, or we don't say were, it's a different word. They plus are, they're coming home. Future tense is it's happening in the future. And basically in English, we use the word will to imply our simple future tense. I plus will becomes I'll be flying soon. He plus will becomes he'll be happy to see you. She plus will becomes she'll be ready soon. And again, that's different than shall. We say it different and it's a different meaning. You plus will is you will need a calculator. We plus will, we'll go to the park later. And again, it looks the same as well, but we say it different and it means them different. They plus will, they'll be ready at 5 o'clock. And it plus will, it'll be dark soon. It's not a super common one, but it does get used in speech a lot. Now, some common contractions can get mixed up for the very simple reason that sometimes we have one contraction form, but it works for two different long-term forms. So if I put I would or I had, they both get shortened to I'd. So if I said I would go to the store with you, I could say I'd go to the store with you. Or if I was talking about the past, like I had a little red wagon when I was a kid, I'd a little red wagon as a kid. Now, it's awkward, okay? But it does exist. He would or he had can get shortened to he'd. She would or she had both get shortened to she'd. They would or they had, they'd. You would or you had, you'd. We would or we had, we'd. It would or it had, it'd, which is so awkward, but it does exist. Remember that would is conditional and based in the future. Contractions with had are the past, and it's then that generally did happen, okay? You're gonna have to look at the context of the sentence, like the rest of the words, to see whether it meant had in the past or would in the future, right? There's no easy way to tell based on the contraction itself. And then there's a whole bunch of contractions that we use to indicate no or not, the opposite of something, like do plus not equals don't, can plus not equals can't, will plus not equals won't, have plus not equals haven't, did plus not didn't, was plus not wasn't, were plus not weren't, and then had plus not hadn't, would plus not wouldn't, could plus not couldn't, should plus not shouldn't, has plus not hasn't, is plus not isn't, and are plus not becomes aren't. Now, these contractions do sometimes get used at the beginning of a sentence. When you see them there, the way that English works, it kind of is assuming that your answer is negative, but it's not 100% certain, right? Like if your mom walks in and sees you sitting playing games and she looks over at the kitchen and there's a pile of dishes and she says, "Didn't you do the dishes yet?" She kind of already knows the answer, right? She knows, no, you didn't. She's kind of asking the question as like a hint, hint, you should have done it. Isn't he done his homework? Aren't you coming with us? Weren't you scared? Can't you find your keys? And all of these are using that inverted thing where we put the verb first and then the subject, okay? And contraction, these are some things where we get them confused. And the reason is because the way we say the contraction for have, we just say oof, and it sounds a lot like the word of, OF. So a lot of times when people are trying to write it down, they write it wrong because they don't realize it's really a contraction. So if I say he would have, it's short for he would have. I can't write he would of like OF because of is a preposition. It doesn't make any sense there, right? She could have is short for she could have, not she could of, right? It should have, it should have, not it should of, okay? Of is never used as part of a contraction other than time. If I say 8 o'clock, I'm talking about 8 of the clock. But other than time, we don't use it for contractions. Okay, so just kind of quickly practicing, look at these sentences. What contraction would make sense in this sentence? Think about, is the word singular or plural, right? Because there's singular and plural forms of the verbs. And is it talking about the present, the past, the future, or is it conditional? Like it might happen. Mom said we blank go on our own. I'm going to assume that that one would be like can't. We can't go on our own. Okay. Betty said that she blank go with us tonight. Could be won't or shouldn't. I'm gonna put won't for right now. Maybe I want it later. Spinach is slimy, so I blank want any for dinner. So I don't want any for dinner. I am feeling sick, so I blank be going to work. I could say won't. There, and in which case Vicky said that she shouldn't, or maybe couldn't go with us tonight. I blank eat the cake because I am trying to lose weight. I shouldn't eat the cake because I'm trying to lose weight. I thought when John would be there, but he wasn't. I don't like that teacher, so I blank been going to class. I haven't been going to class. Blank, you going to eat any dinner? Aren't you going to eat any dinner? Why blank you go to the store and get milk like I asked? Why didn't you go to the store and get milk like I asked? Okay. Ooh. All right, a whole bunch of things here. So I forgot, I got mixed up what we were talking about today. Today we are looking at an opinion piece in a paper, and we're going to try and identify opinions, the main arguments, and supporting details. We should be able to identify the topic, the audience, the purpose, and the requirements of the particular writing form. Use appropriate strategies to monitor our comprehension when we're reading. Demonstrate the ability to read independently, and use appropriate strategies to discover the meaning of unfamiliar and technical words encountered in our reading. Okay, so I'm kind of loosely calling these ideas text topics or text concepts. Not really sure what to talk about them. We're basically, yesterday and today, talking about a bunch of tiny little things that can actually have a really big effect on your writing, okay? So things like form or format, purpose, tone, audience, message or arguments, making connections to support your arguments, vocabulary, and idiomatic expressions. Okay. So we've, throughout the course, studied a bunch of different forms or formats, what we sometimes think of as types of writing, okay? But we haven't really done it the opposite way around. We haven't looked at a piece of writing and decided, hey, what format is that in, okay? Some formats are a little bit easier to recognize than others. So for example, a lot of people will find poetry really easy to recognize because it's so different from other types of writing. So here's an example. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. How could we tell this is a poem? Well, first of all, there's a bit of rhyming, soul and all, near rhyming. it doesn't have proper sentences, right? It's more like little fragments, which is something I think of as poetry. And it's not really trying to communicate information, it's just trying to create an image. So that would be the other reason why I would say this is probably poetry. Here, okay, now it actually says business letter format. I need to take that off, but I could tell anyways because I've got an address up top, I've got an address over here, I've got dear Mr. So-and-so. The moment I see that, I know it's some type of letter, right? Then there's a bunch of information and then I sign it sincerely so-and-so. That's a letter format, right? Here, eat fresh, buy local. We are open online all day, every day. And we've got seasonal items, new farmer market highlights. This is an ad. How do I know? Because they're talking about when they're open. They're talking about what you can buy there. They're trying to make the material look really like exciting and healthy for you. So I know that they're trying to sell something the way this is set up, right? It's set up the way ads are set up. Set up is like another word for formatting. Okay? Here's a little bit different. This one says Banknotes, Volume 17, Issue 3, August 2023. Metere Bank, fraud protection, online safety tips. Then there's a bunch of information about bank fraud. So from the information up here, I would say this is probably some sort of magazine or newsletter called Banknotes, Volume 17, Issue 3. That usually means like it's the 17th year and it's the third issue in the year, which is apparently in August. I would say that because they don't really seem to be selling something, they're more giving you information. It's not necessarily trying to give you an opinion about anything. I suppose a little bit, trying to give you an opinion on how to stay safe, I guess. But that would be my guess from what I'm looking at. And then here, so this is clearly cut out from a newspaper. So I might instantly want to say a news article, but if I look at this carefully, it actually has the word guest opinion. I don't know if you've run into this before, but opinion articles and news articles are not the same thing. They both appear in papers, but they have a different format and a different purpose. So a news article has the inverted triangle format where it gives you all the main information at the very top and slowly gets less and less important. And its purpose is to inform you about something that happened. An opinion article is written more like an essay, and they're trying to convince you about an opinion, right? Sometimes people read these and don't realize it's not news, it's somebody's opinion. Now, used to be back in the day of the dinosaurs when I was around, there was like a special page in the middle of the newspaper, and that was the page that was dedicated to opinions. And so that was where the letters would be, that was where competing opinions would be. And you knew that anywhere else, it was more or less news articles. I don't find that papers do that. And sometimes the word opinion will be a tiny word that you have to notice. I think is tricky and deceptive, and I think is really bad. But anyways, be aware that this is a totally different format and a totally different purpose than a traditional news article. Okay. So for assignment 33, we are going to read a passage and think about the audience, the purpose, the format, and the tone. And then you're going to answer the questions that follow in complete sentences. So this is by Chris Selly, and it says, decriminalizing is beside the point. And then right up top in kind of different letters, it has, when people can use drugs openly in public with neither enforcement nor aid forthcoming, the law is pretty much mute. If anyone doubted that the conversation around harm reduction for opioid addictions has changed dramatically, it came loud and clear from Ottawa last week. The federal government denied Toronto's request to decriminalize possession of small amounts of hard drugs for personal use, and nobody much complained. Associate Minister of Health Yara Sachs who handles the mental health and addictions file, didn't really bother getting specific about why. She didn't need to, the D word having come to connote all the opioid-related urban misery we see most famously in Vancouver's downtown east side. Sachs has determined that Toronto's proposal does not adequately protect public health and maintain public safety, her office explained in a statement. This includes concerns with feasibility and the ability for law enforcement to implement the proposed model, protection of youth, and the lack of support from key players, including the province of Ontario. Some harm reduction proponents expressed disappointment, but none suggested that the sky would fall, or at least not any harder and further than it has already fallen. The latest federal data recorded 5,975 opioid overdose deaths nationwide from January to September last year, up 8% from the previous year. It's not one of those situations where the Liberals get away with something for which the Conservatives would be pilloried either. The progressive Conservative government at Queen's Park strongly advised the city last week not to pursue decriminalization, hence the lack of support from the province that Sack mentioned. And that wasn't really a big deal either. Not so long ago, I feel like Premier Doug Ford would have been called a murderer. The recent disastrous examples of British Columbia and other jurisdictions that have attempted this experiment are the latest examples that show decriminalization of drugs does not work. Ontario Health Minister Sylvia Jones and Solicitor General Michael Kersner wrote to Dr. Eileen Davila, Toronto's Chief Medical Officer of Health. Instead, it encourages dangerous behavior in public spaces, victimizes innocent people, and undermines law enforcement's ability to protect our communities. I could spend a whole column pulling that apart, but I'll just note again that every mainstream politician I'm aware of, including Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, agrees that addicts should be treated first and foremost as patients, not criminals. I'll note again that BC is the only Canadian jurisdiction to have decriminalized hard drugs, and yet Ontario suffered just as many opioid overdose deaths per capita in the first 9 months of last year as BC, with Alberta nipping at their heels. I'll note again that decriminalization only has to mean it's okay to shoot up in a playground if we allow maniac judges the last word. As frustrating as that logic is, though, we do seem to be coalescing around a useful, common understanding that decriminalization of drugs isn't the be-all or end-all of anything. No less than Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow, caricatured by her opponents as the gleeful harbinger of urban chaos, said as much recently, no doubt anticipating the city's application is dead in the water, but also making good sense. Without adequate housing and treatment options, Chow told the Globe and Mail, it's just a battle over a word. That's dead right. You can have supervised injection sites without decriminalization, as Toronto and many other cities do. You can have safer supply opioid programs without decriminalization. No one is suggesting sending the cops out to round up addicts on the streets. Indeed, when you look at the state of parts of the city on your average evening, the question of whether or not to decriminalize the possession of hard drugs seemed ludicrously mute. A block west of Victoria Street, outside and across the street from one of Toronto's supervised injection sites, which closes at 10 p.m. Monday to Saturday and 5 p.m. on Sunday, a small community of obviously desperate people congregates with their meager worldly goods. As I left the Imperial coffee shop, I witnessed 2 security guards shoo them out of an alcove where they didn't seem to be doing any harm except to themselves, and on to Dundas Street themselves. Belongings were flung onto the sidewalk. People were staggering, limping, moving their wheelchairs along by foot. It was stomach-turning. So what do we call this situation? Criminalization sure doesn't cut it. You'd need the police to pay attention first. Decriminalization doesn't work either, since that kind of implies a deliberate strategic choice. I would go with something like humanitarian disaster, Because I would hope we could all agree on that. It's natural that people disagree on how best to tackle the issue. But the risk of dwelling on disagreement is that we simply become inured to this disaster as a reality of urban life, and not just in big cities like Toronto or Vancouver. And we mustn't let that happen. So just for awareness, that is a shortened version of a much longer piece. There isn't room for all of it, but you can certainly find it online if you want to. First question, what is the form or format of this piece of writing? And what are some clues or reasons that you believe it is that form? Some possible forms include journals, personal recounts, opinions, news articles, procedural writing, poems, songs, short stories, or letters. Now, when they're asking you about clues or reasons, they're asking you, what did you notice about the writing format or writing features, either the formatting, the content, the style, that gave you hints or ideas about what form or format this type of writing was? Number two, when the writer wrote this article or text, I guess, what did you think his purpose was? What was he trying to do? And explain why you think so. When you're answering this, remember that there's only three main types of purpose in writing: to persuade, to inform, or to entertain. Explain your reasons why you chose one of those three types. What aspect of the writing, what about it suggested that it had that particular purpose? Okay. Number three, what do you think is the tone of this piece of writing? And explain your reasons for thinking that. Now, I know tone can be a bit of a tricky concept. We looked at this a little bit on Thursday, I believe, where we examined how the audience can influence what type of tone we take in our writing. Tone is kind of like the emotion or the attitude behind the piece of writing. I want to say that there isn't only one right answer for this. I've had different students give me different answers for this. As long as you can support your idea with some evidence from the actual writing, that's fine. So you couldn't tell me, oh, this is super happy, if you can't back it up, right? You have to be able to show me from the writing itself where you got that idea, okay? Just kind of talking about tone. Aside from individual word choice, the overall tone or attitude of a certain piece of writing should be appropriate to the audience or purpose. The tone may be objective or subjective. Objective is like it tries to be factual. Subjective is more personal opinion. Logical or emotional, intimate or distant, serious or humorous. It can consist mostly of long, intricate sentences, of short, simple sentences, or something in between. One way to achieve proper tone is to imagine a situation in which to say the words being written. A journal might be like a conversation with a close friend, where there's the freedom to use slang or other casual forms of speech. A column for a newspaper might be more like a high school graduation speech. It can be more formal, but it can still be funny or a little bit familiar. An academic paper is more like a formal speech at a big conference. Being interesting is desirable, but there is no room for personal digressions or familiar usage of slang words. In all these cases, though, there is some freedom of self-expression while adapting to the audience. In that same way, writing should change to suit the occasion. This is kind of taken from Wheaton College, Illinois. We've got a little article there on style, diction, tone, or voice. Okay. I'm not going to read that article, but I am going to talk here about this is talking about fiction, but it's true for nonfiction as well. The type of relationship you want to have with your reader and the type of relationship your characters have with each other. For nonfiction, I would say the topic you're talking about, right, will inform the different tones you use through your narrative. Obviously, if you are talking about the death penalty versus talking about the fireworks display on Canada Day, you're probably going to be talking very seriously about the one and probably more lightheartedly about the other because they're different topics. One's quite a serious one, one's entertainment, right? Things like cheerful, pessimistic, hopeful, optimistic, melancholy, arrogant, reverential, fearful, humorous, impersonal, desperate, persuasive, or inspirational, right? You can kind of look into some of the details there, but different types of writing can have all sorts of different tones. That's not exhaustive, by the way. There's way more than just that. 4, who do you think is the intended audience for this piece of writing? Explain why you think that. And then we've already talked about it is never okay to say everyone or anyone, okay? Every piece of writing has an audience. It might be quite a big audience or might be quite small and specific, but there's usually some sort of characteristics the writer was thinking about when they wrote. It could be based on their nationality, age, gender, income, education level, culture, heritage, or race, hobbies, interests, or talents, occupations, marital or family status, location of where you're living, or health. So, like an article about the fact that there's a wonderful festival going on in New Brunswick this weekend is not really going to interest me, even if it was like a music festival that I'd be interested in, because I'm not wearing close to it. I'm not going to be going to it, right? That's the kind of thing we're talking about where, yeah, you might be interested, but I'm not really the audience. The audience is the people that live nearby that will actually spend their money to go to that music festival. So that's the kind of thing we're asking you to think about. Think of 1 or 2 things that you think are important for that audience. What are some aspects of the writing that might influence your idea of what type of audience the author is aiming for? So lots of hard words or complicated sentences might suggest an audience with a high education level like university or college. Simpler words and more basic sentences might suggest more of like a mid-level of education, such as high school. Gender might be indicated by the way the writer addresses the reader, like women know this argument doesn't hold water, or real men buy Ford trucks. Things like age might be indicated by the content, right? If we're talking about retirement plans, you're probably going towards mid-aged or seniors, or specific words. Seniors want comfort. Teenagers feel free with this product. Marital or family status might also be indicated by content or words. Moms worry about their children's health. Single people deserve the same tax breaks that married people get. Location, we kind of already talked about how, so for example, changes to Canadian tax laws will interest all Canadians, but it won't matter to the US citizen. But something like the war in Russia and Ukraine is probably of interest to a lot of people because that war could affect things all over the world, right? Health. Advertisements about medicine or health aids are usually targeted at people with specific health issues, right? Like migraine medicine for people who suffer from migraines, diabetes medicine for people who suffer from diabetes. So that's kind of the audience per se for that particular item. Hobbies and interests, especially in ads, but even in articles and stuff, like an ad might be for a new type of bike. Well, if you don't bike, you're not going to be interested in it. There might be a news article in a paper about, oh, the city's created a new bike path. Again, that might only interest you if you ride a bike, right? Income is tricky depending on what type of writing. Like ads definitely target different income levels. Newspaper things, it depends. Some stories might be relevant to everybody. Some stories might be only relevant to people of lower income, like news about GST rebates. Some news might be only relevant to people about higher income, right? If there's a tax break for a business owner, but you're not a business owner, not going to matter to you, right? Race, culture, and heritage is controversial, but it really can be an important factor to certain types of content. Some information or advertising might affect certain groups more than other, like information about immigration or refugees, or a news article about a certain cultural event or a health issue that affects people of certain heritage more than other. For example, sickle cell disease affects those with African and Central American heritage at far higher rates than those of different heritage. 5, what is the main message that the author is trying to get across to his readers? Now, this one has 1 detailed sentence. I think I changed that to like 2 to 3 detailed sentences, actually. Sorry, I think this is a little bit different. Check your book. Okay. The big thing for this is that you're trying to get across not just the topic, like it's about drugs. No, what is his opinion? What is he trying to say about drugs or what we should do about drugs, right? Try to get across the main points of his opinion in 2 very dense sentences, okay? What are the main arguments he uses to support his message or a main idea? So I want to talk about that. This is kind of tricky, okay? As student writers, I often ask you guys to spell it out really obviously, like in my opinion, or I believe, but newspaper writers don't necessarily make it that obvious, okay? They may state it using words that are opinion kind of words, but only if you sort of read closely and notice it. If they say things like, this is the best plan, well, best is an opinion word. That is the worst idea. Again, worst is opinion. In my experience, okay, so they're saying, hey, someone who had a different experience might choose something different. But I have found, same idea, someone else might think something differently. Many people realize, well, many people might not realize that too, right? Those are kind of iffy, opiniony kind of words, right? You have to be kind of cautious of those. Do you agree or disagree with the writer's opinion and his arguments or his reasons in this text? Use at least 2 examples or experiences from your life or the world around you to explain why you think he is correct or incorrect. Now, I want to point out, there is no right or wrong answer, right? Someone might say, yep, he's right, and here's why. And as long as they can support their answer, that's fine. Someone else might say, no, I totally disagree, and here's why. I'm not looking for right or wrong here. I'm looking for your ability to argue about your opinion and support it with specific examples. That's what I'm looking for, is being able to support your ideas. Okay, there are many challenging words in this text. Choose 2 difficult words that seem unusual or strange and give me their meaning, and then use the word in a sentence of your own. Words that everybody knows, like things like youth or police, will not be accepted. I say this because I one time had somebody do this particular thing and they chose like things like the and of. I was kind of frustrated because I felt like, clearly that isn't what I was aiming for, but I'm spelling it out now, okay? It has to be something kind of a little bit challenging. So you can use dictionary to help your understanding. We've talked before about how to use a dictionary. One purpose of dictionaries is to look up the meaning of a word. But the reason why you might do that is because you're trying to understand a piece of text that you're reading. And sometimes an unfamiliar word is throwing off your sense of the overall meaning of an article. Sometimes a word may not even be overly important, but it's easy to figure out the word without it. Other times a word might be so important that if you don't understand that word, it just doesn't even make any sense without it, okay? And I've had that happen every now and again. I've like been talking with a student and they're misunderstanding something about a story. And as we're talking about it, I realized it's because they misunderstood a word and the word means maybe the opposite of what they thought it meant. And so they've gotten kind of confused. So there are some hard words in this particular article. So you may have to look things up. So what does feasibility mean in this definition? Now, you actually can't easily find the word feasibility, right? You can find feasible, which is an adjective, which means things like capable of being done or carried out, capable of being used or dealt with successfully, suitable, reasonable, or likely. So I've got to know and understand that feasible plus ity becomes feasibility, which is a noun. So feasible is an adjective describing whether something is capable of being done or capable of being carried out or successfully carried out. So when she talks about, we think this proposal is concerned with the feasibility, like how successful will we be of trying to implement this proposal, right? So they're talking about whether it's reasonable or realistic that they'll be able to do it in a successful way. So you have to look up the dictionary definition, but you also have to kind of know a little bit about the word parts. So we talked about suffixes a little bit, right? Yep. Okay, talk about that. We're good. The other thing is, sometimes when you're looking up a word, you can try and create a sentence of your own that uses the word correctly, or a dictionary may have a sentence that uses it. Feasibility. The prime minister tried to create a peace plan for the two warring countries, but both of them doubted the feasibility of his ideas. In other words, they didn't think it was going to work or be successful, right? Yeah, so that's where you're trying to think of a synonym that might work instead. Number 9, in this text, the writer says, no one suggested that the sky would fall, or at least not any harder and further than it has already fallen. The underlined phrase, the sky would fall, is a type of idiom, or a phrase that cannot be taken literally word for word. What do you think they mean when they're saying that? And then in the context of this specific article, what did the writer mean when he said that? So there's a lot of strategies for figuring out idioms. First strategy is what we call read past. And that's where you kind of just skip over it, read past it to the rest of the sentence, and make a reasonable guess. And if you put your synonym in there and it makes sense, then there's a reasonably good chance that you figured it out. So she had known Betty since their salad days in high school, and she had not changed a bit. So in the context of the sentence, it sounds like she means she's known Betty since they were young and in high school. Salads are kind of fresh and green, which makes me think of young or new. I'm going to suggest the word youthful might substitute, or inexperienced, as synonyms for the phrase salad days. So if I put those in the sentence, let's see if it works. She had known Betty since their youthful and inexperienced days in high school, and she had not changed a bit. Yeah, that sounds reasonable, so I would think that I've made a good guess. You can use a dictionary. There are online or print idiom dictionaries. This is especially reasonable if you're an ESL learner, or if you're reading for another country. Like if you're reading a book set in Australia, they have slightly different idioms than we do. Same thing about Britain. So sometimes you can be reading that and it's just kind of confusing, and you can use this idiomatic dictionary to look it up if you're having trouble making a reasonable guess, right? And then strategy 3, this is kind of generally is, once you've learned a new idiom, you could, if you're trying to learn English or any new language, keep a little notebook by your desk and write down some of those new and unfamiliar phrases. This is especially helpful if you're, say, reading a novel where the author might keep reusing those kinds of idioms over and over again, okay? So here are some idioms from Australia, for example. If I said, hit the frog and toad, that means like hit the road, like get out of there. If I said, what's the John Dory, which is the name of a fish that rhymes with story, it means that I want to know what the gossip is, like spill the tea. Now, I would never guess those, right? They're just too different from how we talk. It's totally fine to not know idioms. But if you come across them, it's always important to look them up. That particular article used at least 2 idioms that might not have made sense. That is thing to think about whenever you get confused. I just noticed, oh my goodness, I am over time. So I have to go. I will be back tomorrow and we will talk about the next assignment. Take care and shoot me a message if you need help with something.